Good afternoon and welcome to African Voices platform. My name is Chewe Chihana and I will be speaking to retired lecturer Dr. Paul Okojie from Manchester Metropolitan University, who is a specialist in criminal justice law. We'll be talking about the Nigerian protests that have been taking place to end SARS. Dr. Okojie, welcome to African Voices platform.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, what are the SARS protests all about? What is the background to that?
Well, the project or the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS, was set up in 1992. The reason for it, there was a spate of armed robbery, kidnapping, violent crime in Nigeria. And SARS was given the function to try and control and deal with that problem. And as it was conceived, it was to provide a degree of criminal intelligence to target those responsible for the kidnapping, the violence, and the robbery. It wasn't intended to exercise operational function, but criminal intelligence for the targeting of the criminals. However, in time, that role was expanded and it became a direct operation insofar as it began to mount roadblocks to actually arrest and deal with the criminals.
And this you're suggesting, this operational arm was not part of the remit of SARS when it was established?
Yeah, but it was expanded later.
Okay, so within the legal ramifications, they were legally assigned to do the operational issues. I see. Thank you.
And
yeah, go ahead.
As it carried out the operational functions, it had young people have complained as being the group who were primarily targeted.
Right, I see. And so who is behind the protests? Is it these young people? And what do the protesters want to see now?
Which project are you referring now?
Sorry, the protests, sorry. The current, the
protest is primarily by young people in response, as I say, to what they see as the targeting, the high-handedness in the method used by the special squad team, and also the arbitrary manner in which they carry out their work, which includes intimidation or allegations of intimidation, torture, kidnapping by the SARS squad, and also extortion.
Right. And what are the demands of the protesters? They have become a global protest, but what are their demands?
Okay. They made 5 demands. The first of the demands is those who were arrested should be immediately released. The second of the demand was justice for the victims of police brutality and compensation, particularly for families of those killed by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. And the third is setting up an independent body to investigate the crimes and prosecution of police officers responsible for the crimes. And the fourth element has a retraining aspect, including exposing the SARS police officers to psychological evaluation to determine their suitability to carry out a high-powered functions such as this one, which involves the use of gun. And finally, which is quite remarkable, they wanted an increase in the salaries of the police officers so as to minimize corruption. So you can see how interesting it is that on the one hand, they've specified the litany of issues they want to be remedied. At the same time, they were thinking of the welfare of the police officers. So that's their five demands.
I think that's absolutely remarkable, and I imagine they attribute some of the misconduct, I suppose, if you would loosely say it that way, to the probably financial inequality when it comes to employees of government. But the fourth point, so there has been an announcement by President Buhari and also the Inspector General of Police that SARS has actually been abolished. To what remit that is true or not, you're going to tell me. But also within that, there's the ruling that those who are found culpable are going to undergo psychological training. Would you speak to those two issues, please?
Okay. I think the abolition of SARS is true. The government responded to it, and the Inspector General of the Police announced the abolition of, or the disbandment of SARS on the 13th of October. So the government response to that was very quick. And the government asked for more time to implement the other four items. Now, unfortunately, there was a problem because having disbanded the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, the Inspector General Police announced that the squad and the SARS was to be replaced by a new body, which was called Special Weapon and Tactic Team, SWAT. And this raised a lot of suspicion because the SARS officers were to be dispersed and absorbed into the police structure, and the protesters didn't believe that the new body, SWAT, would be any different from the body that had just been disbanded. And the other aspect of it, which is worth mentioning, is that SWAT is in fact a mimic of a similar paramilitary body, which was an anti-robbery, civil rights body that was set up in the US. And it was tooled up. It used army personnel and so on to try and control crowds and deal with issues of armed robbery and so on. So it was unfortunate use of acronym because it brings to the minds of people, is that what you, setting up to replace one body we say is awful, with one which is even going to be militarized. It may not be, but in terms of association, it was most unfortunate.
Right. So does that actually explain why the protests have continued?
Absolutely. It lacked credibility. They
Yeah.
began to undermine the credibility of what appeared in the first instance as an appropriate response, but the protesters believed that the issue wasn't the change of names, the
Yeah.
change of attitude. And they didn't think that a SWAT weapons, the use of special weapons, actually constituted a change of attitude. And by setting it up so quickly, without time for training and retraining and changing of attitudes, that there was mistrust that the government have heard the cause of a protest.
So Dr. Okojie, I beg your pardon. My understanding is that this is not the first. As an outsider, this is the first I've heard of protests against SARS. But from a Nigerian context, I understand this has been going on for years, and this is sort of a culmination. Is that correct?
That's correct. In the 28 years of its existence, SARS has been the subject of criticism. Sometimes it leads to protest, but mostly people were unhappy with the way the police were doing their work. The extortion, the brutality, the torture, the intimidation, the abuse of human rights, the arbitrary use of power, and the lack of due process. That has been known. And each time, as the pressure and the criticism builds up, the government makes an offer to reform or to disband SARS. It made 4 attempts. It made 4 promises that SARS will be either disbanded or reformed, and it never happened. And I think this is the credibility problem that the government was having.
Okay. And so in a very sad way, we've witnessed an escalation of deaths. Amnesty International is working this out to be upwards of 9, 10. What has the government said? Because I think officially they're just saying there's one death that they're investigating. But what do you know?
Well, I think the trigger for the protest was the death of 2 men. I think those deaths are not contested.
Right.
I don't think that the government has been quite honest with itself in terms of the fatalities. When the president made a broadcast a day ago, he didn't say anything about the allegation of the people who were killed in a place called Lekki near Lagos. The allegations is that 12 people were killed. The actual numbers are in dispute, but there is silence, official silence, on the part of the federal government as to the number of people that were actually killed. Whatever the number is, I think there is definitely a feeling that having disbanded SARS because of its brutality and torture, the military police were sent who were behaving precisely like SARS. There was no distinction between the behavior of the military on the day and the SARS that had been disbanded. And I think that is part of the problem that fueled the anger of the protesters, that nothing seems to change in spite of promises.
Has there been any word from ECOWAS, the African Union, on this? Any official statements you're aware of?
I'm not aware of an official ECOWAS statement, but
Right.
certainly the Ghanaian leaders have called on the Nigerian government to stop the killings, as have some other African leaders and many foreign and European Union leaders have called on the Nigerian government to deal with the situation without further loss of lives.
Do you think, I mean, you're right there. I think quite a lot of people have come in to comment or say something or give some input. I'm also aware of famed people, so celebrities in the actual sense of being a celebrity of some music industry or theater or whatever, contributing some funding pot to some of the organizations that are supporting the demonstrators. Is there any link, do you think, between the recent anger, visible anger across the world towards police brutality and this heightened demonstration and visibility of the Nigerian situation?
The answer to that is there are not one protest going on in Nigeria. There are two.
Right.
In the southern part of Nigeria, the SARS Protests is concentrated there. In the northern part, there are protests going on, not linked directly with SARS, but inspired by it. And in the northern part, there are concerns about security issues, particularly the threat of Boko Haram. So the federal government is actually facing two different kinds of protests. Now, I think that both protests are internal rather than being influenced externally. And what has made it what made it spread is obviously the use of social media and the response of people who are not necessarily young people themselves, but those who have experienced sense of intimidation, brutality, and arbitrariness in the method used by SARS in their policing. So there is resonance. There's a lot of ordinary people who actually believe that enough is enough.
Lovely, thank you for that. And speaking of the northern part of Nigeria and the alternate, so I didn't realize there were actually protests leading up to this. What I understood was that there was a mixed sentiment over there, because SARS has largely been credited for tackling some of the issues that people face with Boko Haram, the militant group over there. What is your sense of this? How would this work without SARS? What's going to happen next?
Well, I think the Boko Haram issue is slightly different, right, in that is a militarized response. The government has been involved for many years now to try to defeat Boko Haram, but they do very daring raids on communities, and as you know, at one time schoolgirls were kidnapped and so on, and even governors themselves are not safe. They're not safe in using public roads because they could be the subject of attack. So there's a general sense of insecurity, and they are demanding that the government does something to protect the sense of insecurity that is prevalent in the some northern parts of Nigeria. So they're not actually complaining about SARS, but they are concerned about the insecurity, which is very widespread in certain parts of northern Nigeria.
I see. Thank you. I'd like to tap a little bit into your expertise on this. So it's inevitable that I would have looked a little bit, at how Nigeria's police force is ranked around the world. And in 2016, on the Index of World Policing, Nigeria ranked the worst out of 127 countries. Would you say part of that is what we're seeing now? What's become more visible to people like me from the outside, that the role of SARS, or what factors would have contributed to that?
Well,
and is it valid in your opinion?
For an African country, these international comparisons, to my mind, don't carry much meaning. Okay, I don't mean they're not important or relevant.
Yeah.
But I don't think we should be wedded to the evaluation and assessment. Now, you see, Nigeria is not an easy country to police. Yeah. And it's not easy to be a policeman in Nigeria. I'm not saying.
Is it that population-wise?
Let me continue. Let me continue.
All right.
So there are underlying issues.
Okay.
Now, the issues facing the Nigerian police are one, over centralization. You have a central police force policing 200 million people. That is 400,000 police officers policing 200 million people. And it's over centralized. It doesn't have the flexibility in order to respond appropriately to the particular needs of particular areas. So it is regimented in that sense. It is not well funded. It is poorly trained, badly paid. It has no equipment, and it has no respect for human rights. And just to give you an illustration, for example, if you were to report to the police that you have been burgled and the police want to conduct the investigation, they may ask you to pay for the petrol to take the police to the scene of a crime. That shows you how bad the situations are. Also, the police don't help themselves. There is poor recording, there is poor equipment, there is poor data collections and so on. So there are all sorts of issues. So if you're going to make an international comparison, it has to be like with like. So this is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that international comparison is not desirable. It's just that the problems which beset the Nigerian police structure are fundamental.
I appreciate that. I think I can actually, it's interesting how that is I could draw parallels from the policing in Zambia actually, and we have a much smaller population, so definitely it's fundamentally a systems change that's probably needed across the continent. What about the Inspector General of Police? There's been a change since 2016 in between through these protests. So the previous Inspector General of Police has tried to exonerate himself. He left in 2016 and saying this current spate has got nothing to do with him. Do you think the Inspector General of Police, whether that previous one or the current one is culpable in this situation, or is it very much a presidential level situation?
I think you can't attach the criticism to just one individual, whether it is retired or current. The government itself had been promising to reform the police structure, including all the special units of which SARS is a part. And those reforms are not in the hands of the police. They're in the hands of the federal government. The Inspector General of Police is an appointee of the president of a country. He appoints them. Now, within the police structure, there is the Police Service Commission with the responsibility to deal with matters of discipline and misconduct within the police. The PSC itself is not an efficient body to deal with those matters. So the Inspector General of Police has a lot of influence. He can actually set the pace of conduct of his officers. But I think that the problem of the reform of the police is beyond the Inspector General of Police. It is a political decision, and that is where the failure lies. The government has reports after reports on how the police might be reformed. They don't follow those reports. So I would say certainly the Inspector General of Police has an important, significant role, but the fundamentals are beyond the responsibility of the police. It is a political one, and this is where the federal government bears the blame for the failure of policing in Nigeria generally.
Thank you for that. So I have one question that's unrelated to your career and your expertise, and then I'll ask you about your expertise to finish off. So the unrelated question is, how do you think this will impact the next elections?
Well, the next election is, no, okay, I know the answer. It doesn't matter. Nigeria is governed by people who are called plutocrats, okay?
Right.
One plutocrat is out of office, another one comes to office, and you don't see any difference, yeah? So I would say that it may affect the perception of the present political party that is in government. But elections in Nigeria are not often by free and fair methods, okay? There is a lot of vote buying and so on, and governments do have access to treasury to buy votes, yeah? So I think because the election is, 2023,
yes,
it's a long way away, memory fades. The government has promised that they are listening. They could do something, yeah? They could surprise us, they could shock us. And what the young people have done has actually provoked the government to take some actions. So it may go further. So I won't draw a connection between the next election, change of government, and what will happen in 2023, because there is still plenty of time between now and 2023 for the long promised reform of the police to take place. But that will require decentralization of the police. You can run the police for a country of 200 million people with 400 police officers, 400,000 police officers from the center. It's not workable. So the government knows this. But yeah,
Right.
miracle does happen.
You never know. So I'm going to take a bit of liberty there because you've just and still ask your question around that, but it's more around the region of the West African region. So currently, I don't know if you followed the elections in Guinea by any chance.
In Guinea,
Yeah, in Guinea at the moment,
wow.
President Alpha Conde's third term bid, and the elections have happened. There's been a spate of violence. We're still waiting on the actual results on this. The problem you've just described seems endemic across the continent. Just wondered if you had any comment before I ask you the last question.
You can link up Guinea with Cote d'Ivoire. Yeah, in Cote d'Ivoire you have similar problem, the problem of term elongation. Okay, the African Union, the ECOWAS have a commitment to ending term elongation. You should step down when you come to the end of your term. The problem there is, and this is the case of these regional bodies, and as well as continental ones, they have rules which in themselves are logical, are sensible, and is a way forward, but they lack enforcement. What do you do if a leader chooses not to step down? Okay, Ouattara is refusing to step down, and there are protests, and people are dying. Yeah, same thing in Guinea. Yeah, they're refusing to step down, people are dying, rioting, and so on. I think there is a need to rethink how the continent, the continental bodies, and the regional bodies addresses this issue. That is to say, in San Tome a few years ago, when a coup d'etat removed the head of state, Obasanjo flew in and told the coup makers, if you don't restore democratic government, you bear the brunt of a Nigerian army. And they capitulated, okay? So do we need an overarching body to actually ensure that there is the respect for what is in the domestic constitution, okay? So when all else fail, what do we do, yeah? In order to protect lives, in order to protect democratic institutions. And I think the time has come, in the case of West Africa, for ECOWAS to begin to consider how it would enforce this non-term elongation, because it is a problem that has beset the continent for so long, and it is crying out for a solution. And that solution is long overdue.
Thank you so much for this. And I really appreciate that restraint. But my very last question to you is, what would be your recommendation now? Where to next, and what are your expectations with the SARS protests, and how do we move on from here?
Oh, you mean in terms of Nigeria?
In terms of Nigeria, yes.
Okay. Now, the government is beginning to reframe the issue, and this is evident in a broadcast by President Buhari yesterday. The issue is being reframed in two ways. One as a law and order issue, and we see that in the use of the military, okay? And secondly, it is being reframed in the sense that the protesters are well-meaning, but they are duped. They are duped by disgruntled politicians, and this will not be tolerated. Now, if that approach is pursued, the government, in my, will be an unfortunate way of looking at it. Duped or not, the government itself has admitted that SARS does not live up to its legal responsibility. It has disbanded SARS. So that proves that the protest has legitimate reasons. What we were looking forward to was how the government intended to respond to the 4 items it said it needed time to look into. For me, the fundamental issues are that beyond the 5 points, the decentralization of the police service, that will take time. The second point is the funding of the service and a different kind of training, not just the psychological aspect of it. The police officers have to be trained to see themselves as there to support the civilian population. Yeah. And very often they don't see it in that way at all. Yeah. By carrying guns, people keep away from the police. The police has a motto, says, friend of the people. The people see the police as their enemy, yeah? They don't see the police as friend. So the way forward will require, I would say, at least 5 years of reform. And the starting point is decentralization, yeah? It's over-regimented. The service needs to be flexible so that it is a local service rather than a central service. And then it has to be properly funded. It needs modern equipment. I'll give you an example. There was one particular year when I went into a police station in Lagos in Nigeria because they had detained a Lebanese for alleged armed robbery. And the staff who was working for this Lebanese asked me to go and see the head of the police station because the guy had been detained for a long time and no charge had been brought against him. And that was my first time ever in a police station in Nigeria. By the time we got there, it was about 9 p.m. The police station was dark, no light. The police officer, the desk officer, was taking notes by candlelight with a pencil. And there were over 300 people in a small police station. There was only a standing space. A standing space, no bed, nothing at all. So when I said policing in Nigeria is not an easy job, yeah? Let's make it easy for the police officers. Give them the training, give them the data, give them the equipment, and also teach them human rights, respect for the dignity of the people you are supposed to serve. You're not there to police the people, you're there to serve the civilian population, and you begin by respecting them. If they do that, they will move forward. But going by the broadcast by President Buhari yesterday, I don't think he's actually grasped the enormity of the difficulty which lies ahead. And that difficulty is not one of law and order or a small number of people who are being duped.
Dr. Paul Okojie, thank you so much. I think there's a lot there for us to unpick, and thank you so much for contributing to this conversation on African Voices platform. We do hope you'll be able to come back as well for future conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Good night. Thanks.
Okay.